everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today to learn with Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe about Moshe for her class, Are You My Mother? Nature versus Nurture in Moshe's Life. We are very honored to learn with her today and to film this podcast and this video so that folks can learn from wherever they are in the world, whenever it's convenient for them. And you can, if you are joining from YouTube or Spotify. You can also visit our learning library on valleybeitmidrash.org to see all of our past recordings. I'd also like to thank BMHBJ in Denver and Congregation Ort Zion in Phoenix for co-sponsoring today's class, and welcome Andre Ivray from Ort Zion to introduce today's guest speaker.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome everyone. It's a great honor for Ort Zion, for Congregation Ort Zion, to co-sponsor this wonderful learning opportunity with Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe. Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe serves as the Associate Rabbah at Hebrew Institute of Riverdale in Bronx, New York. She is grateful for the opportunity to teach Torah classes, instruct the conversion program, answer halachic questions, facilitate tefillot, offer pastoral guidance, craft life cycle events, and connect with families and singles, young and old. Sounds a lot, very similar job descriptions and loves that we have. She has taught many to Lane, and her voice is featured on the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance website, reading the four Megillot and selected Torah portions. In HIR, the children know her as the rabbi who sings Israeli children's songs and gives out stickers. I do a bit of the same, a little less song and a lot more stickers and candy. That's how we get them. That's how we get them. Rabbanit Bracha is passionate about bringing mental illness out of the shadows and has spoken about it in different settings. She loves connecting people to each other and encouraging them to be their best selves. Some of her favorite pastimes are kickboxing and reading books to her grandchildren. Rabbanit Bracha lives in Riverdale, New York, with her husband, Martin. Rabbanit, it is a pleasure to have you with us today and to learn from you on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. That was lovely. I appreciate that. And I wanted to welcome everybody who's on. Taking even a few minutes out of a busy day to learn Torah is awesome. And I love the way the Valley Beit Midrash records so that people can tap into it anytime they want to when it's online. That's brilliant. And it's not the first time I've taught for Valley Beit Midrash. Always an honor, and I'm always happy to do it. So let's talk about Moshe. Moses, our greatest teacher. He is really central to our story, and actually it's such perfect timing because this is the Parsha of the week, the Torah portion where we get introduced to Moshe, where he's born. Even though we know about him, Moses, Moshe, however you call him, Moshe Rabbeinu, all of those names are basically the same person. And he's unusual. He had a very unusual upbringing. He also was unusual that he reached such a high level with God, that God said God was face to face with Moshe, with Moses, and his name echoes forever in our communal memory and in so many of our stories, held up as a paradigm of what it means to be a good leader and to be humble. And he was able to shepherd and lead the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, from Egypt, where they were in slavery, and able to get them out of slavery, out of bondage, into freedom, and then become a nation, bring them through the desert for 40 years. So it interested me. What really, really interests me, especially given the way we know about psychological beginnings and how parents can influence children. And I guess I'd read a lot about nature and nurture, thinking about things like, which is more modern day, things like surrogacy, or when you have sperm donors and there's something called epigenetics. You can look that up. It's very cool. And how much of it influences, how much of it was what he was born with, and we know he came from a Jewish family, and how much of it was he inspired, nurtured, and created the Moshe that we know. That was what interested me when I thought about, well, he wasn't really brought up, he's more, I would say it's more like a modern family. We describe modern families as being not always dad, mom, kid, Sometimes it's a grandparent who's raising a child, or sometimes it's two moms, or it's two dads, or single. And that feels like Moshe. Who talks about that? That Moshe was not the standard being brought up in a regular family, and not even his biological family. So I thought it would be nice if we looked at the main people who influence his life, specifically the women, and see if we together can figure out, think about, discuss. And I'm happy for people to raise their hands or put something in the chat. And Alex, I would be grateful to you if you notice something in the chat, because I will probably be focused on the sources. But I'm happy. I don't need to wait until the end. If somebody wants either clarification, or if you have a comment, I'm always delighted to hear, because, and this is really true, I'm not just saying it, I learn so much when I'm on a class, when people speak. There's always something new that I get out of it, unless nobody speaks. Then it's whatever I said. So I welcome that. I welcome feedback and I welcome thoughts. We are going to, did you put the source sheet into the chat, Alex? Perfect. So people can look at the source sheet online, but I'm also going to put it up because people in the future, for example, might be looking at it online, and this way it might be easier for them to follow. First, we're going to look at Moshe, Moses' biological family. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Ah, that feels better. Let's start looking at the sources. Just going to keep an eye on time, 3:15. Okay. I know it's 1:15 where some of you people are, but by me it's 3:15 right now. This is what we learn about Moshe. Let's first see what are his beginnings. As I said, this is his biological family. A man went out from the house of Levi. Remember, there were 12 tribes. One of them is called Levi, and married Levi's daughter, meaning a daughter of Levi, meaning a daughter of the tribe of Levi. Not his sister, it was his aunt, I believe, but they were related to each other because they came from the same great-grandparent or whoever it was. The woman conceived and bore a son. She saw that he was good and hid him for 3 months. However, she could not hide him any longer, so she took for him a basket, plastered it with the clay and pitch, placed the child in it, and put it among the reeds by the riverbank. By the way, what I always recommend people feel they don't have a solid grounding in the text. I myself have never seen the Ten Commandments, and I've now started to watch it in installments because it's really, really long. And I'm watching it with my husband. He said, "You never saw the Ten Commandments? That can't be." So we did 1/4, and we're going to do it in 4 installments because I can't find the time for like a 3-hour movie or whatever it is, or even more. And I just saw, actually, we just went through that scene where she put baby Moses. And anybody here want to say, this is where I get you pulled in. Anybody here want to say why she had to hide him? And why she put him in a basket? Any thoughts about that? Anybody know? Can unmute and say something. Yeah, Alex.
Because of the law, I guess, or the decree, I'm not sure the right word exactly, that all the Jews had to kill, or
Well, they didn't kill them, but yeah, had to be killed. Go on.
right. That all the Jewish sons, I think it was just sons, correct, had to be.
Babies, yep, baby boys, yep, 100%.
Yeah.
That they had to be killed. So she wanted to hide him. So I really encourage that people will, it might be just Alex or Alex and Andre, but everybody's encouraged. What traits do we see from his biological mother? Any thoughts? Andre, go for it.
Well, we talked about in Minyan this morning, the importance of knowing early in Shemot. Of course, the meaning of it is names, that we know where people come from. It's important to identify who they're from. And she found him, very pleasant. She found this son very pleasant.
Right. That's good.
That he was good. But she felt that she had a need to hide him because of this law. There was a bit of a shame. There was a bit
Oh,
of
you thought it was shame. That's so interesting. I always thought about it as danger. Yeah.
Danger. I mean, danger is probably for sure a better word, but she felt an immediate need to go through everything she could to protect him.
Yes, yes. And she was really resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
She was really, really resourceful, because if everybody had done this, then it would have said that about everybody. She was either the only one who did it. All the Jewish moms had the same problem, that their sons might be killed. But she, at least in the Torah, that's the only story is told is about her. So I want to add to that, unless somebody else, please. I don't necessarily see everybody when I'm sharing the screen, so feel free.
If I could add one thing.
Yeah, Andre, go.
She also had a plan. She knew
Yes.
exactly how to make it. She was resourceful, and she was prepared.
Nice. Nice. And can I add and again, I want to say if somebody wants to say something, you can just interrupt or, raise your hand and Alex will see you. But what I want to add is it seems to me that she believes in God. Or she believed that something, because why would she assume if she puts an infant who is 3 months old, why would she assume that he wouldn't be killed? I don't know, alligators, crocodiles, the Nile River. Who could find her baby and take care of him? So there seems to be a transcendent belief in something, that something good will happen. Does that make sense, people? That's how I'm reading it. I don't think I would have physically and emotionally been able to take any one of my 3-month-old children. I have 4 children when they were 3 months old and put them in. I just would have had such amazing, unbelievable trepidation. By the way, she did tell, I didn't put it in here, I should add that she told her daughter, Miriam, I think she told her, or Miriam decided to stand watch. So Miriam, she was only 6 years old at the time, but she was also very what would be the word? Maybe resourceful, courageous. 6 year old. She's willing to be proactive. She cared about her brother, and she was willing to stand guard to see what would happen to him, which probably calmed his mother a lot. Okay, great. So we have an idea of what he's perhaps inheriting from his mother, and I assume at some point in his life he heard this story. When you hear stories, right, of resourcefulness, resilience, courage, belief that things will be good, then that stays within you. Oh, I come from genes like that. My mother was like that. I think that's part of it. Okay. I want to continue and take another look at his mom from a different direction. There's a midrashic teaching about this particular passage. This goes back to what Alex said, that the children had to be killed, that the sons were going to be killed. The king of Egypt, when he saw that he was having trouble killing the boys, the sons, so he said to the Hebrew midwives, not clear, by the way, if the Hebrew midwives mean Egyptian midwives for the Hebrews or Hebrew midwives for the Hebrews. It's not clear from the text. So that leaves interpretation. One of them was named Shifra, the other one was named Pu'ah. We've never heard of anybody named Shifra and Pu'ah except for here. So the rabbis, some of them interpreted as code names, like nicknames. And he said when he delivered the Hebrew women, if it's a boy, kill him, and if it's a girl, she may live. That was his plan for killing them. The midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, and they kept the children alive. So he summoned them and he said, why have you done this thing and have kept the boys alive? And they said, well, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're natural childbearers. They don't really need us. By the time we get there, the baby's born. He had said, as they're getting born, kill them. So the mothers would, as if, think that the baby died in childbirth. Of course, it would be a little odd that all the baby boys died and not the girls. And then because they feared God, God rewarded the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew extremely mighty, meaning the Jewish people. And it came to be because they feared God, God made houses for them. So this is a little bit of a black box. It has pieces that don't seem clear. One of them is, what does that mean he made houses? God made houses. He built them houses? Like, what does that mean? And also, who is this Shifra and Pu'ah? So you may have heard about the midrashic interpretation of this, but I'm telling you why the sages came up with what they came up with. So hold on one second. So the rabbis said, well, first of all, we never heard of a Shifra and Pu'ah. They're not listed anywhere else. But sometimes people get nicknames. So they said, well, maybe it was Jewish midwives. One of them's name is Shifra because the word l'shaper, the shaper means to improve. She made the babies better by blowing on them, by whatever it is she did to make them survive. And the second one was Pu'ah, and that was another reason that she was called Pu'ah, something with peh, that's one answer, meaning she spoke back to Paro. Peh means mouth, and she had a mouth on her, that she was willing to stand up to this mighty ruler who was so cruel. Why did they think they wouldn't be killed in the moment they said this to Paro? But then they came up with the idea, who could possibly be who had such courage and belief in God? And because they see later that God made them houses, and from Yocheved, her 3 children are the 3 main houses of Judaism. She has Miriam, married the son, one of the children of Judah, who became king. That's the lineage of kings. David became from that lineage. That's one house. Aaron, Aharon, the second oldest, he's the chief, the head priest, and all his sons are priests, Kohanim. And Moshe is the first Levi, and all of his sons and their descendants are Leviim. So if people are familiar, these are three houses of Israel: the priests, the Kohanim, the Leviim, the Levites, and the kings. Three leaders. So the rabbis put together the end of this passage with the fearing God. And again, if we roll it back to what I said, if Yocheved put Moshe into a basket, she believed that God, it seems like she believes that God would save her baby, and says, this must be Yocheved and her daughter Miriam. Have anybody heard this, that the two midwives were Miriam and Yocheved? Anybody heard that before? If you have, you can raise your hand. Nope, you never heard that? This is actually so common among many people who have learned this, because sometimes you learn it in kindergarten. Some people think it's written in the text. Like they're surprised when they say, what? Doesn't actually say Yocheved and Miriam? But weren't they the midwives? But now you know this is the most common interpretation of who the midwives are. Now it's true, it's possible that it wasn't. But let's say it was. Let's say it was Yocheved and Miriam. What else does this teach you about Moshe's mother and sister? If the midwives really were his mother and his sister.
I think just reiterating kind of how courageous they were and not afraid to stand up to authority and stand up for what they thought was right.
Exactly. A true sense of fairness. So standing up to authority, taking action. Right? Did they have agency? I would imagine if you just read until 16, let's say you didn't know verse 17, would you imagine that the next verse was they didn't do as the king of Egypt told them? No, you would think these are two women. Where did they get the courage? Where did they get the thought even that they would take any action and feel like they have agency to do something? Which, by the way, always reminds me of Queen Esther, how she was not given authority, but she took authority and she was able to succeed. That's a whole separate story. But it's interesting to see that the women often who are highlighted, because not so many women are highlighted in our tradition, often they are women who had courage. And I think courage and belief in God are really two important traits. So what have we learned about his biological background? We have learned traits like courage, resourcefulness, creativity, belief in God, maybe resilience, not sure. Anything else I missed? Nope. Andre.
That they saw themselves, they were confident in their identity.
Oh, I love that.
Um,
Awesome.
and not just to take the and not just believers of God, but they did. I love how you mentioned taking their responsibility for their authority,
Yeah.
and that's how I interpret verse 21,
Yeah.
that they saw themselves as keepers of the covenant.
Oh, beautiful. Oh my God, this is gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That makes it, that's zooming out and seeing it from an even, a greater distance and seeing that's gorgeous. Thank you so much. Okay, now that we have learned about so everybody with me? This is his natural mother, right? This is his biological mother. Now let's look at his adoptive family. Well, mother, but family. So what happens? Remember, where did we last leave Moshe? And I didn't put it in, but his sister, which I love, and I will put it in for any time I teach this in the future, because it says, "Vatetzav achoto merachok," that his sister was like stationed herself from afar to see what would happen to her brother and maybe to intervene, if she saw something happening to him, which I love as well. And remember, she was only 6. Okay, so Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe in the river. Which river? The Nile River. That is the river. With her maids who were walking by the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to fetch it. Some people say, by the way, not her maid. The forearm is an amma. It's also a cubit because that's the length of an average man's forearm. But an amma is also a maidservant in Hebrew. They all mean the same. They're all the same word. Why? Because when you're royalty, your maidservant does your work for you, right? You don't do menial labor. So the word is amma in Hebrew, but it could mean her maidservant, or other people say, well, she didn't want any of the maidservants to see what she was doing, So she reached out her arm, and there's like a midrash that says it just kind of grew until she was able to pull the basket in. That's where it comes from. Like there's a reason for those stories that her arm grew longer, because that word leaves itself open to interpretation. And we say, well, the princess of Egypt is not going to be, getting muddy and wet in the water, but she wanted to know what was in the basket. She opened it. She saw the child and found the boy, interestingly, he's 3 months old, was crying. She had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews." Okay, now let's talk about the attributes of his adoptive mother. I don't know if you knew this, but he grows up in the palace and she's basically his mother. So in case, spoiler alert, this is where he actually physically grows up. But we're not there yet. And so what are we saying? What are we saying about the daughter of Pharaoh, which sometimes people could say it's like the daughter of Hitler, right? An edict to kill all the boys, enslaving the Jews, trying to browbeat them, really push them into the ground, making them all slaves, the men and the women. And what is she doing? Like, you could imagine. Okay, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know it's only Alex and Andre, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts. And the others are all welcome to chime in.
I was going to say, I mean, of course, it says it right there, compassionate, but in addition to that, just kind of accepting and not prejudice, and
Yeah.
accepting of different groups and different people that are different from her, even when she was brought up to believe that they are less than.
Right, which is pretty interesting, because how often does that happen? It's so
Right.
easy to, if you're brought up to think that the Jews are just terrible, right? I heard a Jewish comedian yesterday, and it's just a little snippet, and he said something. He said, I know, there's been an uptick in anti-Semitism for the last 3,000 years. Right, so that's right. So if you're brought up to think that Jews are awful and to hate them and to think that for whatever reason, how is it that the daughter of, how would she even the word compassion, like where does that come from? So first of all, she's curious. She probably knows there's something strange about this basket, and she knows it's a Jewish person. Now, either she knows because he had a circumcision, right? He was circumcised, or because who else is going to hide a baby and put them in the Nile River? You don't do that with your children as a rule. So she knows that. And I'm already telling you, she's going to keep the baby. So let's remember that she, at least to me, like this feels like a hero to me. Somebody who was willing to take that extra step. Okay, so now we can continue down to the next source. The families meet. There's an actual meeting of the adoptive family and the biological family. Remember what I said to you about Miriam, his sister. So this is verse 5 and 6, as you can see. Right away in the next verse, we see his sister Miriam said to Pharaoh's daughter. She was there, and she pops up and like, can I help? I'm here, can I help? By the way, there's a medrash that the reason, why would she pop up? Why wouldn't she just watch what happened? That says that they brought wet nurses for him to suckle, and he wouldn't nurse from any of them. And that's why she was able to step in. When you read about Midrash, it's one of my favorite things to teach, not just Midrash, but how do you get from the text to the Midrash? Well, otherwise, the sages, whoever wrote that Midrash, said, well, what do you mean his sister stepped in? She's all of a sudden approaching the daughter of Pharaoh? Like, where would she get the chutzpah to do that? But if she saw that he wouldn't nurse from anybody, so she's like, ding, light bulb moment. She said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call for you a nursing woman from the Hebrew women so she may nurse the child for you? Like, that makes sense. Because if she saw that Moshe was not willing to nurse from an Egyptian woman, then she has an opportunity. Who do you think she's going to bring? She's going to bring his mother. Oh, she has exactly the right milk for him, actually. So Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. Already you know that Pharaoh's daughter is saving Moshe's life, right? Because what she should have done was kill him, according to the edict of her father. The young girl went and called the boy's mother. Well, that's great. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child to Yocheved, to the mom. Nurse him for me. I will pay your wages. So she also gets paid, which is, she would have nursed him for free, obviously. The woman took the child and nursed him. We think until age 2 or 3. That's generally when they were weaned. Could be 2, could be 3. The child grew, then she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. He was as a son for her. And she named him Moshe. That's the Hebrew name, although people say that is an Egyptian name, saying Min Hamayim Mishitihu. So if you look at this word Mishitihu, if you read Hebrew, you can see that Mem and the Shin are in the Hebrew in Moshe, and they're also in this word, Mem and Shin. If you don't read Hebrew, you just have to trust me on that one. Mishitihu and Moshe. So how many people knew that actually it was Pharaoh's daughter who named him? Now, like that's, you might know that, but you might think, well, didn't his parents name him? That's, Now in the Torah, who is the one who usually gives a name to a child? Anybody here know? There's a lot of naming going on, a lot. Who usually gives the name?
Sarah
Named her son, yep.
named her son.
Right.
So generally you'd believe it's the mom. But
Yeah, it's the mom. In fact, if you look at Jacob's 12 sons, at least the Leah, and Rachel, they named their 8 sons together, and they also named their maidservants sons. Each one has a reason. It's either the father or the mother. So isn't it interesting that with Moshe, who actually had a biological mother who's in the story, and yet his adoptive mother is the one who gives him a name? What do you think that means? Any thoughts about that? What does that tell you? What is that signaling to us? So you know what? Let's go to the next source, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what our sages said. So in Shemot Rabbah, which is a compendium of Midrashim, I probably have it in the footnotes, or a collection of Midrashim on Shemot from the 11th or 12th century. It's pretty ancient. And it says like this, and the boy grew up, so that's from a different verse. It's like wait, is that here? The boy grew up? Oh, here it is. The boy grew up. This is it. Vayigdal hayeled, and the boy grew up. It's from verse 10. For 24 months she nursed him. So how can you say that he grew up? Rather, he grew, but not like the others. Okay, that's not so relevant. But we do know that Yocheved nursed him for 24 months. During that time, it sounds like he didn't have a name. Or whatever name his parents gave him, we don't know it. And she brought him to Bat Paro. She brought him to, remember that's what it says here. The child grew up, then she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. Bat Paro is Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter would kiss and hug him and be affectionate with him as if he was her son, and would not take him out of the king's palace. So I wonder if she didn't take him out of the palace because she was nervous, or she thought the Jews might take him, or I don't know why. But then it continued, or maybe it just means that he grew up in the palace, like whatever Pharaoh's children did, he did. She brought him up as her son. She called him Moshe. From here we learn the reward of those who are kind. Who was kind here? The daughter of Pharaoh. Even though Moshe had many names, the only name used in the whole Torah is what Bitya is what they call Bat Yamin, the daughter of God. Bat Paro, the daughter of Paro, called him. Even God's self did not call him by any other name. That he had other names that his parents gave him or others gave him, but it gives her credit and it's like rewarding her. She's the mother. Meaning that whatever traits she had, she's going to bestow them upon him, not in a nature way, but in a nurture way. So we do see, it's a little hard to know. We know that the Hebrew midwives, they had compassion. We certainly know that Yocheved and Miriam had compassion on Moshe, but of course it was their son and brother. We know that the daughter of Paro was extremely kind. So I think kindness and compassion was added to the other attributes we already heard of about Moshe. And I really believe that mothers, especially mothers who spend a lot of time with their children, they really do pass on, or at least set a role model, an example of what kind of traits the child should grow up with. So and there's one more here. It says in the Talmud, in the Gemara, and his wife, the Jewess, bore Jared. Jared is another name of Moshe. Bore, but, okay, one second. This is talking about, sorry, I didn't explain this. This is talking about Bat Paro, that she married a Jew, and it says she bore Moshe. But why? The Talmud says, how could you say she bore Moshe, but she only brought him up? This tells us that if anyone brings up an orphan boy or girl in his home, the scripture accounts it as if he had begotten him, meaning that if you adopt someone, thank you, Carrie, one second. If you adopt someone, you can be considered like their parent, meaning you bring them up and you act like a parent to them. You are can be considered their parent. Carrie, please.
Um, I don't know. It might be weird how I'm wording this question, but did Moshe live in the same place, like the palace, as Pharaoh did?
That is such a great question. I don't know how to answer it. It seems very odd and almost impossible because how could a Jew grow up in Pharaoh's palace? Like, how could that be that he didn't have him killed? But we also have a really interesting medrash that says that he used to like bounce him on his knee like it was his grandchild, and that the reason, remember, it says that he was heavy of like he had a impediment, some sort of speech impediment. Anybody heard that about Moshe? In fact, when God asks him to be the leader, he says, I can't. I don't know how to talk. My lips and my tongue are heavy. So there's a beautiful midrash that says that Pharaoh was holding him on his lap, and he had a prophecy that a Jewish boy would end up usurping him and taking out from his throne and taking out the Jews. So he said, well, let's check this child. So he put in front of him a diamond and a glowing coal. At a young age, when a child wouldn't know not to touch a fire ember, and the coal should have really. So Moshe, who knew the difference, reached out his hand, this is the Medrash, to the jewel, but an angel moved his hand to the coal. He picked it up, burnt his lips, and started crying, and that's where he got it from. So that Medrash seems to say he actually did grow up in Pharaoh's palace, and Pharaoh just didn't believe that this child who was so sweet and cute and his daughter rescued would actually be the one who would, it doesn't, Carrie, it's like such a good question because it doesn't fit with the text. Like, what happened in all those years? Where did he actually live? Was he hidden away? Right? It skips over. The text just skips that over, which is so interesting because Prince of Egypt, which is also a nice movie to watch, and the Ten Commandments assume that he was a prince. They assumed that he was a prince and he grew up with Pharaoh's other children. I think that is such a great question, and I'm waiting for you to write a medrash on it.
Could
Go,
that
Carrie.
also be why she didn't want to say anything? Because like he acted like his child and like she was afraid of the feedback people might say about him.
What do you mean she didn't say anything? When didn't she?
Well, 'cause I
Oh,
think you kind of mentioned like she, like,
it said she didn't take him out of the palace. Yes.
yeah, so maybe like
Yes.
she didn't want
I
anybody like to say anything negative because
Yeah.
of how she found the kid or like how her dad was
Yeah.
acting towards him.
Yeah, and she probably never told anyone how she found him. Like that, I can imagine she didn't tell people because that would be scary. So how do you hide that also? Which is even in the movie I just saw that she sent all her maidservants away. She doesn't want them to see her rescuing a Jewish child. So yes, I think that there's a lot that's not described here. But what is very clear, it never says he went back till he grew up. It doesn't say that he ever went back after he was 2 years old and weaned. It doesn't say he went back to his Jewish family. In fact, I imagine the Jews didn't know him unless he met with them clandestinely. I don't know. I found that interesting. Like, where did he get his relationship with his brother and his sister? When did that happen? But yeah. So that's a whole other story, which I think would be amazing to teach. And that's how Midrash gets written, because there are questions about gaps. And so the Midrash comes to fill in those gaps. So we filled in a few of them. Okay, so again, this is just the Talmud Bavli saying that the daughter of Pharaoh, his wife, bore Yered, and Yered is one of the other names for Moshe according to our tradition. Now, if we're still remembering what were the traits that Moshe has inherited or been nurtured. So now what happens? Moshe, by the way, do you notice? Sorry. He's rescued in verse 5 and 6. In verse 7 to 10, he's taken to his mother and nursed until he's weaned. And then in verse 11, Carrie, this is for you, right? He's only 2 years old right here, according to this, in verse 10. And in verse 11, he grew up. That's it. We just skipped over the next 18 years. We just ignored it. We don't know what happened. So it's really, really interesting. And it was in those times that Moshe grew up and went out to his brothers. Now, who are his real brothers? The Jews. So he knew they were his brothers. But he may not have had relationships with them. He may have been curious and said, I'm adult now, whatever that means. And it's time for me to go see. I've heard stories about the Jews being slaves, but I've never met any of them, or I don't really know. He went out to his brothers and saw their afflictions. He saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his brothers. Now, somebody grew up in the palace, you can imagine, might have also been indoctrinated that he should hate the Jews, or at least wouldn't have taken action. But what does he do? He looked this way and that. He saw there was no one around. He struck down the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. Now, that shows, I think, compassion, courage, taking action. Some of those same traits that we've seen, resourceful, I don't know if it's resourcefulness. I guess he must have been strong. Maybe he was trained in the martial arts as a prince or as somebody brought up in the palace. But perhaps we see compassion certainly for his brethren, and also seeing that an Egyptian is just striking a Hebrew, just like that. Probably not for a good reason. So remember where we were. We were 11, 12. Now we're going to get to 13. This is more of the text. He went out the next day, and behold, there were two Hebrew men who were quarreling. Now it's two Jews. He said to the guilty one, which I have no idea how he knows which one was guilty, maybe by his face, I don't know. Why do you hit your fellow man? He said, who made you into a man, judge, and ruler over us? Like, who are you? We don't even know you. You've been living in the palace. Who are you to tell us what to do? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So now Moshe was found out, and now he gets a little bit nervous. They do not see Moshe as their leader, not yet. I think that shows more that he was brought up by Pharaoh's daughter, and they're not aware of him being their leader. They don't see him that way yet. In fact, they are almost threatening him that they're going to tell on him, that he killed somebody the day before. And that's when he got afraid. Okay, so up until now, these are some of the qualities. This is what I saw, so I'm recapping from my notes here. Courage, compassion, strength, caring, purpose, and activism. And in the end, he actually identified with his biological family and maybe he could have lived his life as a prince without any care or worry. But that's not what he chose. And I wonder, if that says something to people. What does that mean when you identify with your family, your biological family? I think that's an important thought. Where am I really from? Yeah, Andre.
You had mentioned earlier a comparison to Megillat Esther,
Yeah.
and all that keeps, two things ring true for me in this section. The original Superman movies, the first one, he just comes to Earth, and all of a sudden, there's a montage, and all of a sudden he's Superman.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's raised by this family in
Correct.
Iowa, and all of a sudden,
Cool. That's a great comparison.
but in comparing it to Megillat Esther,
Yeah.
I think there's a connection to, even, and I've heard this in anecdotes from friends about, adoption and fostering, how sometimes, children come into their own when adopted children or foster children come into their own when they recognize and acknowledge their own true identities, especially if they come from a different ethnicity. And there's so much here that is hidden that doesn't really come true until until all the covers.
Nice.
And
Beautiful.
it almost foreshadowed, he doesn't become a leader until he takes the mask off of himself. He's not necessarily the Prince of Egypt.
That's right.
He's got to be the leader of the Jews.
Yep.
And once he
Well,
learns,
not yet. He's not the leader yet.
but he, we're kind of the text is kind of setting us up for that, unveiling.
Nice. Nice. Unveiling. That's a good word.
They're not ready for
taking
him
the
because
covers.
he's not ready.
Beautiful. That's also very beautiful. And as a matter of fact, this whole thing about not being ready, I question, why did Moshe have to come from this kind of sort of blended family, which actually in modern day to me feels very relevant. And many people might say, I connect with that. It's not a perfect model. It's not what we would wish for a child to be pulled away. I can imagine a child who was nursing until age 2 years and 3 months would probably, or until 24 months. So, 21 months or the first 2 years of his life, and then to be kind of grabbed from his mother, and actually, I believe there's a midrash that says that she used to allow Yocheved to meet with him and to see him. It must have been really hard, obviously, on both sides. Although, at least he's alive, that's true, but it still must be very difficult. And another thing is, it's possible that this is a way to see Moshe as a real person, a little bit flawed, not perfect. He doesn't come from a perfect background. He maybe had to overcome things to get to, as Andre says, to reveal and understand his own identity. But I want to add one more thought here. If you are brought up as a slave and you have slave mentality, that is going to be really hard for that to flip and to become a leader. You don't even have the time or the wherewithal to, you're so tired and broken. But Moshe grew up in the palace, so I can imagine he had more of those qualities you need for leadership, because he was trained that way, and he just was not brought up as a slave. So sometimes it needs to be somebody outside the situation that saves the situation. And there was sacrifice here. There was sacrifice from Yocheved. What happens now is that Moshe actually runs away because he's scared. Remember, we said he's afraid. Moshe became afraid, say the matter became known. He gets very worried that Pharaoh is going to come after him because he killed an Egyptian. What are you doing killing an Egyptian that hid a Jew? Like, the Jews are just slaves. They're not important. They're just fodder. They're just to build our cities. So he ran away, and he actually spends the next good chunk of his life growing up. But I didn't bring that in here. But growing up in Midian under Yitro, who becomes an adoptive father for him, but I didn't bring because there's only so much you could bring in one class, and marries one of his daughters, and the daughter's name is Tzipora. Okay, that's going to be the next source. But what I want to, so he sacrificed living both with his adoptive mother as well as his biological mother, and in order to save the Jew that he killed the Egyptian. In other words, because of that act, he had to leave again a known home and find himself a new home. First at age 2, he was torn from his home. Then at whatever age he was at that time when he killed the Egyptian, and he found a whole new home. So maybe it is possible that Moshe just doesn't exactly fit in anywhere. He always feels a little bit like a stranger, and we have a hint to that here in source 9. She, Tzipora, that's his wife, bore a son, and he, Moshe, named him Gershom. Now, he's been living for a long time in Midian, but he says, I was a stranger in a foreign land. Another way of explaining it is perennial outsider. He was a stranger in the palace, and now he's a stranger again in another land. It's not his adoptive family, it's not his biological family, and he doesn't fit in anywhere. And Andre, it's so interesting because my notes also, the way I looked at it, was that he needed to figure out his own identity. He doesn't fit in with the Egyptians in the palace. He doesn't fit in with the Jews. Remember, what did the Jews say to him? What are you telling us what to do? You're an Egyptian. To the Egyptian, maybe he looks like a Jew, and to the Jews, he looks like an Egyptian. And in Midian, they also say you look like an Egyptian. You don't look like one of us. And maybe he needed to be outside of Egypt in order to figure out his identity. Maybe he needed to be pulled away from both his, the palace as well as his biological family. And that was when God approaches him and says, you're the one who should be the leader. So when you belong to different societies, sometimes that can actually open up. I'm just going to go off share. Sometimes that allows you to think more broadly, not to think only of who you grew up. If it's a narrow society, when you belong to different societies, you could be more accepting of different societies, and you can understand when people don't feel like they fit in, and maybe that's exactly the right person to lead all of the Jews, because they're all different. They come from different tribes. I mean, yeah, they were all slaves, okay, but they're different. And maybe as somebody who was a perennial outsider and yet got so many good qualities from his mother, qualities from his adoptive mother, qualities from living in the palace, qualities, all those things can come together to make him the best leader possible, at least from that generation, for the Jews. And maybe that allowed him. Remember how many times the Jews complained? They were really difficult. A stiff-necked people. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm this, I'm that, I'm not happy, we're never going to get there, we don't da-da-da. And he almost every time he says, he argues in favor of them and forgives them, pretty much. He's their leader and he accepts the fact that they're quarrelsome and irascible and maybe that's what he needed to get the fact that things don't fit together so nicely. The puzzle pieces don't always fit together so nicely. Okay. Wait, I have one more thing to share.
Go for it, please.
One more thing to share. Okay. So this is a little bit midrashic. But remember when I said that Moshe has the closest relationship with God? That God seems to feel that I'm able to see Moshe face to face, picked Moshe as a leader, and has this amazing one-on-one relationship with Moses, with Moshe, that God didn't have basically with anyone else. So if we look at this pasuk, this verse in Vayikra and Leviticus is actually, it's about the Yovel, that after 50 years, whatever lands were sold among the tribes, they went back to their original owners. Not today. It's not comparing today. This is the time when the Jews settled in Israel. And God says, Haaretz, the land, lo timacher litzmitut. You cannot sell it forever, permanently to somebody else. Ki li haaretz, because the land belongs to me. Ki gerim v'toshavim atem. You are strangers and foreign residents, imadi, with me. And there's a Hasidic interpretation that says, I, God, am a ger in your world. I don't fit into your world. I want you to also be a ger with me. I connect with somebody who also feels like they don't fit in. And the quintessential ger, as we've seen, was Moshe. And maybe that's why, like Moshe, yes, he was married to Tzipporah, but it doesn't look like they had a close relationship. Maybe God found in Moshe somebody who kind of got God in a way that others couldn't. And maybe for Moshe, God got him because he was this ger. But I want to add, and one more thought, that under everything else, you're only going to come out okay if you feel loved, usually. Even a person who didn't fit in, who got all sorts of... The most important thing that we learn, for babies especially, and children, they need to have love. Unconditional love is the best. Just to be loved. And we learned that Bat Paro used to coo with him and hug him and kiss him, and I guess he got that also. That might have helped him to feel secure in who he was, even as he was trying to figure that out. And there's a beautiful quote from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. And there we have, this love could not be quenched. Had the love from his mother, his adoptive mother, his biological mother. Yeah.
Do you know if Moshe had a relationship with his birth mother, or was only the one who saved him?
We know he had one with his sister. That's clear. I don't think we see it in the text. It's only going to be Midrashim that will give it. And there might be a Midrash that's written that says, oh, this isn't clear. It must be the birth mother who stepped in here. Like I do remember learning a Midrash once that the daughter of Paro allowed Yocheved to come and meet with Moshe and be with him. I do remember that, but I'd have to look it up. Do we know? If that's your key word, we don't know. Do we hope? Yes. Do we imagine? Yes. Do we think that if Bat Paro was compassionate, and it said she was compassionate, we imagine that she would allow it, at least to a certain extent. And maybe she wanted Moshe to grow up normal. And if you wrench somebody from the only mother you've known for 2 years, how normal is it going to be if you don't have a transition period at the very least? How's that? Maybe that's the best one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate the questions. I'm going to end with a quote that I wrote. Not a quote, something I wrote. The reason I use this waters cannot quench is because they met over the Nile River over water. Moshe's families met and intersected over the waters of the Nile, which threatened to take his life. Even through Paro's decree or his basket in the river, the daughter of Paro finding him, all these had to do with water. But the love of these women was greater than the waters.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I also had a question, if you don't mind, I'll throw it in.
I don't
So
mind.
just wondering if there's any indication if Pharaoh's daughter, if she maybe like couldn't have children of her own, if
There's a
that sort
measure.
of, okay.
There's
Um,
definitely a medrash like that. And
yeah.
in fact, in the Ten Commandments, I noticed it also. She said, "Oh, my prayers have been answered. I dreamed, I prayed to God for a child." So yes, that makes a lot of sense, right? Which is why she would shower him with love and why she had compassion, why she was willing to step out of her comfort zone to do that. Yes, and you can see how that midrash would come about because the rabbis, the sages said, "Well, what? Just like that? She just picked up a child?" She's like, "Oh no, no, I prayed for a child, and the child came to me." Very nice. Good one, Alex.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I
Andre, yeah.
don't have so much a question, but a comment, and it was something prior that we discussed and kind of appropriate for going into this at the time of this recording, going into the holiday weekend of Martin Luther King. Dr. King wrote a book called The Strength to Love, and the premise of that book is, as tied in with his philosophy, is that at the end of all of it, human interaction, human understanding comes
Yes,
from the basis of
beautiful.
love.
Yes, yes.
And the overarching, as you mentioned in your last quote, that is the water that surrounds us all. That is what drowns us all, and is this power to love can overcome even decrees, lineage, biological, all this stuff is the power to love. So
From your lips to God's ears.
yeah, I appreciate that. Like it gives me a different perspective
Oh, good.
on something that rings so true even in contemporary society. So
Wow, beautiful. Who knew that it connected to MLK Day also? Didn't even think of that.
Love that.
All right. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always a joy and a pleasure to learn with you. Thank you to everyone listening and watching and for learning with us today. And thank you again, Rabbanit Jaffe, for being here with us.
Jackie.
Jaffe.
Yep. That's okay. All right, my
Thank
friends.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.